Yeah, I'm just eating my
I just
soda.
want to remind you, this is a family show, so there's going to be no cussing.
Whose family? Because in my family, it's like, get the out of bed. The alarm's been going off, asshole. So if it's for my family, we're cool.
All right, so this is a content warning for those out there listening. we will we will bleep these.
Steve, close the door.
This is What Next, the Adoptee Rights Podcast. I'm Gregory Luce, an adoptee rights lawyer and the executive director of Adoptees United. I'm also an adopted person. Each episode of What Next is about adoptee rights, whether we have them, demand them, or have already secured them. I talk with a wide range of adopted people as well as our allies about issues that impact all adopted people specifically, or what impacts the adoption industry more generally. All right, so this is recording. The best stuff is like what we just had and talked about. It'll probably go in the preview or the beginning of it. But I want to talk about just really broadly lobbying. What you've done in lobbying, Ms. Shawna, you're in Texas, and Annette, you're in New York, but maybe even lobbying beyond that. And well, why don't you each introduce yourselves real quick so we have that. So Shawna, why don't you start?
Hi, I'm Shawna Hodgson. I'm a Texas-born adoptee. I was born in Houston, Texas, and adopted in Houston, Texas. And I'm the spokesperson for the Texas Adoptee Rights Coalition, as well as a board member of Adoptees United.
And Annette.
Hi, I'm
Also,
Annette.
you called me Miss Shawna. Are you?
Miss Shawna, yeah.
I know, I realized that too. That's fine. How come I didn't get called Miss Annette? How come I was just
Wait, I
Annette?
called you Miss Shawna?
Yes, and you
I
just
did?
said and Annette. You go like, yeah, screw her. She's eating her soda bread.
And now over to Dr.
I
O'Connell.
can't.
I'm Annette O'Connell.
Are we going to get
That was
anything
so
done in this
Southern.
conversation? I mean, the thing I
That was
hate
so
about sometimes
Southern.
with podcasts is that you have like 20 minutes of riffraff and talk and you don't get to the subject. And I think we're going to end up having 30 minutes.
All right.
Oh my God. All
All
right, well,
right.
we're
Let's
late.
be all business now. Go.
All right, let me try again. I'm Annette O'Connell. I am a New York adopted person, born in the Bronx. I am the spokesperson for the New York Adoptee Rights Coalition. I'm a board member of Adoptees United and also a board member of Bastard Nation. And I work part-time at the Adoptive and Foster Family Coalition of New York, who was part and parcel of NYARC.
And NYARC's the New York Adoptee Rights Coalition. Yep. So this is part of a series called the Legislative Boot Camp. We had thought about doing it in person or on video. It just because of the lack of capacity to do these bigger things, we're going to have a series of podcasts and then eventually develop into in-person workshops. But this one's about lobbying. And I know that both of you have lobbied at your state legislature. I've joined Annette in New York. In fact, that's where I essentially learned how to lobby, and I was more or less not lobbying. I was sort of just tagging along and making a mess with Annette doing all the lobbying, but watching it as it went along. But I've now lobbied in Michigan and in Minnesota, and I testify all sorts of places. But lobbying's it's kind of this, it's a real skill. And I'm wondering, each of you, when it was the first time you would consider yourself lobbying, meaning going to the Capitol and talking to staff and legislators?
The first time I realized that I was lobbying, because going into this in 2014, that wasn't my mindset. I'm going to go lobby. Erica Babin and I had a friend that was a legislator here. It was our first bill sponsor of a clean bill. And we started following him around the Capitol right before the session started. He filed the bill. And basically the way I started out was he would introduce me to legislators that he knew were going to support right off the bat as co-sponsors. And I would sit with them or their staffers and just tell a little bit about my personal story. And at the time, I hadn't found my birth parents. In fact, I was in the middle of searching for my birth parents when this all was happening. So my story then that I would share with them was very different from the story that I shared post 2015 session. But it was really just about having personal conversations and trying to make personal connections with people in the offices who many times have a connection to adoption, whether they be adopted, they have a parent that's adopted, a friend, what have you. And so that's kind of how I started. We would just go from office to office. Can we have a minute of your time? And we didn't even have any materials, really. It was just very personal conversations.
Were you nervous
Was
at
I
first
nervous?
when you first started out doing lobbying and you're just like, I don't know what I'm doing kind of thing?
So, and you guys know this about me, it's not it wasn't so much that I was nervous. It was more so that I kind of felt like, do these people really care? Do they really want to hear this? This is something I'm going through right now, and I don't know if this is going to get through to them in the same way as it does not going to have the same impact on them as it has on me, obviously. So it was really kind of about, it was kind of like honing the craft of trying to make the stories relatable, but also have an impact. So that's something that developed over time. But I wouldn't say I was nervous. It was more like, I don't want to say I'm not embarrassed, but kind of sheepish, about it.
It's really interesting because, I think often I see adoptees and think that everyone's super interested in our issue and everyone knows about it, when in fact no one really knows about it. So to say that
Right.
you thought it was like, why would they even care, was probably more realistic.
Yeah.
In many ways.
Yeah.
And how many sessions? I mean, they have every 2-year sessions. So how many sessions did you lobby in Texas?
2015, 2017, 2019, 2021, 2023. So there's been 5.
Wow. And so do you have any estimate how many
Yeah.
legislators or staffers or offices you visited? Hundreds? Definitely hundreds.
All of them. I mean, there's 100 and what is there? 148, 150 state reps, and then there's 36 senators, I believe. That could be wrong, but I mean, it's a big legislature. So, I mean, at the early days, Erica, if she were here, she would back me up on this. We spent sometimes 10 to 12 hours a day. Just because we'd only be able to be in Austin for a couple days a week at a time. So we'd get up in the morning, we'd be there at 8 o'clock, and we wouldn't leave until 6 o'clock.
I'm gonna come back to that because
Okay.
obviously it's a huge amount of time and expense. And so I'll come back to how that works with, being with your family, with your finances, with everything. But Annette, you have a long history in New York.
Yeah, about the same amount of time as Shawna. I started also in 2014, and had a very similar experience going in, telling my story. I went up with Claudia Corrigan Diorsi first. I was very nervous though, because I just pictured these legislators as being these like powerful people who, so I was really nervous the first couple of under a handful of times. And then I had watched other organizations lobbying for different things too. So then I just kind of fell into the groove and started just going in. I know, like Shawna, right? Making the connections with the office staff was really the important part, because you had to get through the gatekeeper first, right? So I would, and I know you laughed at me, Greg, when you were in Albany, I would collect their paper business cards. And then when I would walk out of their office, I would write my notes on the back. One of the senators, the gatekeeper, had a Ouija board mouse pad. So, I wrote down the person's name and that they had the Ouija board mouse pad, so that I knew the next time I went back, because there were hundreds of offices that we were visiting. And I would be like, oh yeah, I keep forgetting to order my Ouija board mouse pad on Amazon. That's so cool, blah, 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 blah. And making those types of connections was really key.
Wait, so these are kind of like flashcards in the size of a business card.
Mm-hmm.
So you would go, let's say you return to that office, you would take a look at that business card and say,
I would take
okay.
a look at the business card, and yeah, I would look at them the night before I left. I would actually rehearse like a script and read it into like a recording app on my phone, and then play it in the car. And I would record whose offices I was going to go to. So like if you were in the assembly, Greg, right? I'd be like, okay, I'm going to Assembly Member Luce's office, and his people in the front are Shawna and Erica. And I would rehearse it and just play it in my car. And then I would blast "We're Not Gonna Take It" by Twisted Sister as I got closer to the Capitol. And that's like what motivated me each and every time.
Did you
You have to have a lobbying theme song.
Yeah. And mine is "We're Not Gonna Take It."
You have to have a theme song.
Yeah. Once I would get like 10 miles outside of the Capitol, I would just loop that and just like blast it.
Maybe that's what we're not doing right in Michigan. We don't have a theme song yet.
Well, see, you should have consulted with me. I would have told you that's key.
What did you have one in Texas?
Crossroads by Tracy Chapman.
All right, we'll probably have to play this in the podcast. Yeah. Well, maybe we'll open it with Crossroads. And then end it with "We're Not Gonna Take It."
And end it with "We're Not Gonna Take It."
Right. Exactly. Wait, did you continue to do that kind of practice and rehearsing as you got better at it each year?
It would depend. It would depend if the legislature changed and there were new people, then yeah, with the new people, I absolutely would. If there was a change of staff, then I absolutely would. But eventually it came to the point where I would go in and they'd be like, "Oh, you're still here." And I'd be like, "Yeah, believe me, I don't want to be here either," right? Like my son was playing hockey at the time, and my line to them would be like, "I'm supposed to be a hockey mom. I'm supposed to be bringing my kid to the locker room right now, sitting in a rink, waiting, watching practices, but like I'm not supposed to be here. I was never intended to do this. So just give me my shit and I'll go home.
Yeah.
I'll be out of your hair forever."
And that was your other informal motto, give me my
I,
shit.
Yeah, well, it was like informal, but
Yeah.
like I actually used it a lot in certain legislators' offices.
Do you think, I mean, kind of, I think that you
And
can only
like
do that in New York or some other
I was just
state.
going to say that's like, it's a New York thing. And it was only really, I mean, I knew which legislators' offices I could say it in and which ones I couldn't. And some of the office staff were great. They, especially like my Senator Skoufis, and even when he was in the assembly, he would be like, "Annette, if you need extra copies of anything, you need to just sit down and close your eyes for a little bit, whatever you need, come into my office. My staff will lead you to the couch or the copy machine or whatever you need." So when I would go into his office, I'd be like, "Yeah, they're still not giving me my shit." So here I am.
Did you have that same experience in Texas that you could depend upon, maybe it's a sponsor or some senator or representative who was really supportive of what you're doing and would say, "Hey, come hang out and put your coat down here," or whatever, in Texas?
oh yeah. So Representative Joe Desatel, who's a really family friend of Erica's, by the way. She's known him her whole life. We became good friends. I mean, I credit him a lot with teaching me how to talk to legislators too, and helping me kind of fancy that up a little bit, more professional. But yeah, we would hang with him before and after being at the Capitol. We would go in his office, we would take naps in there, we'd made copies. I mean, his whole staff was amazing. I mean, it was just kind of like we had a home base there, and we were really fortunate to be able to have that.
Right.
I don't think if we had that, we would have been able to make that much, cover that much ground, because we were exhausted. I mean, some days we literally went in there and laid down and took a nap.
Right. Yeah.
So
And it's not just
very
physically
thankful for that.
exhausting, it's
Very, very
emotional.
thankful.
And it's emotionally exhausting too, right? Because you're telling your story, you guys know what I always refer to as like prostituting the details of my life, right? Things that like I shouldn't have to be telling strangers these stories about myself, right? So it's not just the physical exhaustion of it, it's like the mental and the emotional exhaustion behind it too. When I would come home, I would call you, Greg, right, to give you updates once NIARC formed, and I started this before NIARC. I would call you to give you updates, but then once I got off the phone with you, like there wasn't even the blasting of music anymore. Like I just had to detox, and the next day I would be down for the count. Like I didn't want to talk to anybody. I didn't want to have to be personable. And I'm generally introverted to begin with. So that comes into play too. But like this whole experience really forced me to go to really uncomfortable places. And I think to a certain degree, it helped me too, because although I still consider myself introverted, I'm not introverted on this topic anymore, right? I could talk for days and weeks on end about this particular topic now.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people don't realize how exhausting it is, but also emotionally draining, whether it's lobbying or testifying, because often I'm sure you had this all the time. You get all these what about questions, and then the what about questions lead to things that we have to deal with all the time that are really emotionally charged. Like, what about abortion, or what about your birth mom who doesn't want to be found, or what happens when you show up at the door, and these stories that are all asked by people who really don't know what it's like to be an adopted person, and so you're having to always defend defend being yourself and being who you are.
Right. And they even feel free. And I think that any self-aware adopted person will say that people always feel free to ask these questions that you would never think to ask virtual strangers, right? Like once someone hears you're adopted and they're like, "Oh, you know, do you know who your real parents were? Aren't you glad you weren't? Like people would literally say, right, in the offices, people would say to me,
Mhm.
well, aren't you grateful? Aren't you glad that you're not adopted? And I'd be like, I don't know, aren't you? And
Right.
they'd look at me with this like a deer in the headlights look, and I'd go, you know that any living person could have been could have been aborted, right? Like
Right.
it's not just adopted people. We're not the only ones. You could have been, he could have been, she could have been. And they, you know, sometimes they just continue with the deer in the headlights look. And other times they'd be like,
Right.
oh yeah, you're right. And I'd be like, yeah, but I don't think to ask anyone that I meet that question. What makes you feel so free to ask me that question?
Right.
And I don't know about you. I don't know about you, Annette, but some of the, I mean, our whole lives we've been, aren't you grateful you're not aborted? Aren't you, da, 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 da. But some of those things, some of those questions I hadn't even experienced until I started lobbying in that context. Like I was not to that degree and I didn't have the language for it. I really didn't have the language for it because I was still kind of coming out of that. I'm not going to say fog. It was like a light mist. I
You
was
were
coming out.
navigating,
I was still kind of
my new thing is you were navigating your waters. Come on, you were the captain of your ship. You read my
I was
post, Shawna.
I I was the captain of the ship. No, I was still, I didn't have the language for it. So I was actually refining my talking points as these questions were being thrown at me. And I wasn't processing them when it was happening because I was so on, like I was had my lobbying hat on. I was so on. It feels like a performance sometimes. And so I remember going home and Erica and I would go crash that night in Austin, and we would just sit there and unpack it all, and we would be like, God, that's fucked up. Like and it took so much out of me. It took
Mhm.
so much out of me, and I think that first year lobbying was probably the worst for me because I was still searching, but also I was starting to realize, like, wow, I knew it was fucked up, the system, but that part of it, I hadn't experienced it to that degree before.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, and it was fucked up, and you're doing it 20 to 30 times a day. That's just crazy.
Right. And
Yeah.
for me, I had experienced it before because my parents were super religious, super Roman Catholic, super right to life. My father would go to the marches in Washington every year and things like that. And his friends would tell him like, "Oh, you should bring Annette with you because like basically they were saying like she's the poster child, right? Because it could have been her." So at a very young age, I started to become aware of the fact that people thought that about me. And at that age, I didn't have the words to say it could have been you too, any one of us, right? But like I knew that I kind of had a target on my back when it came to that area.
Right.
So the older I got, the more acclimated to giving responses to it I became, right? So I had that, but it's funny that you say like you would start processing it with Erica and say like, oh, that was really fucked up because a lot of my lobbying was with Claudia, who's a birth mother. So I would get those kinds of questions and she would get oh, that was so wonderful. That was so brave. Oh, you must have been so proud of yourself. And she would come back with her things. So we would drive the hour and a half back home and be like, can you fucking imagine? Like that was so fucked up that they said that. And she'd be like, yeah, even that they said that to you. So we would like bounce off of each other the 2 degrees there, right?
Right. I actually in
Yeah.
Minnesota it was really
Yeah.
good. We would lobby with the birth mom, usually there'd be 2 or 3 of us, 3 at the most. And that when those questions came up, that was really useful to have a birth mom there to answer it and say, no, in reality, here's how it works.
And the one thing about Claudia, and I always say this, um, I can give, you know, specific examples, but if she would start to answer someone or if a legislator would ask her something that should have been asked of me as the adopted person, I would literally tell her like like, no, stay in your lane. This is not for you. This is for me. And she would like there would, you know, she would just like, and she knew right away. And she would even sometimes just be like, don't ask me, ask her. Right. So
Right.
that was the beauty of like what we now refer to in hindsight as like the Annette and Claudia show, right? We each knew our role. We knew when to step up, when to step back. And I was able to tell her, like, no, in front of legislators, even, like, no, like the bathroom incident, like, no, you can't take the lead on this. This is me.
So wait, you just said the bathroom incident and you're gonna just leave it there? What was what remind me what it was?
So we were in the Senate side and we had to use the ladies' room. So we go into the ladies' room and we come out of the stalls and the paper towel machine isn't working. So someone else comes out of the stall. I'm explaining to her how to do the paper towel machine because it's not working. And at that point, I realized it was Senator Biaggi who had the opposing bill. And I was like, oh, Senator Biaggi, right? And she's like, yeah. And I was like, well, like I extend my hands and I'm like, but you haven't dried yours yet. I'm Annette O'Connell from New York Adoptee Rights Coalition. And she was like, hey, how are you? And I was like, I'm good. How are you? And she said, good. She said, what can I do for you? And I said, well, I'm going to need you to pull your bill, like in the ladies' room.
You didn't say, could you fix the towel dispenser?
No, but I also wouldn't shake her hand.
Right.
So she was like, what are you talking about?
Sometimes you have to lobby in the bathroom. That's
Yeah,
the thing.
like,
you have to you have to lobby in the bathroom sometimes.
Listen.
It happens.
So she sent us in, she said she had a meeting and that she directed us to her office to talk to her legislative director. So Claudia and I go in and we said, we just met the senator in the ladies' room and she told us to come and talk to you. And we sat down with her and she said, well, why is the bill that you're supporting better than the bill that the senator is carrying? And Claudia started to answer, and I literally, in front of the legislative director, looked at her and went, shh, shh, nope, you can't say anything. It's not for you now. It's not for you. And the woman looked at me and I was like, she's not adopted. That she cannot adequately say in this circumstance why the bill that we're supporting is better than the bill you're supporting. You have to hear that from me, from an adopted person.
Right. I'm just imagining standing at the urinal trying to lobby a legislator next to me.
All right, well, ladies' rooms don't have urinals.
I know.
We have stalls, and it wasn't
Look, if you're
talking underneath
No,
the
I
stall.
know.
Everyone was
You can
done. We were
pass notes underneath. Yeah, exactly.
It wasn't like, hey, can I have some toilet paper and can you pull your bill?
And you wrote a please support S3419.
It wasn't
Right.
like,
All the
no,
toilet
I'm not
paper.
going to tell you how to work the paper towel machine unless you pull your bill.
Right.
Wasn't bribery in the bathroom. Okay.
Right. You know, and that's really essential. You're making those relationships, obviously. Let me ask a really basic question. I mean, do you think, how critical is lobbying person to person, face to face, in getting a bill passed?
I think it's vital.
Oh, it's vital.
I think it's absolutely vital.
Yeah.
It's absolutely vital.
I think
paramount to the whole experience. Yeah.
right.
And that's what makes me so sad that so many people are like, oh, we need to get this done in Texas. Oh, we need to get this done in New York. But almost nobody shows up, right? I mean, like I would go up, if I had 4 hours to kill on a Monday, I would take like the hour and a half ride up, go into only 2 people's offices for a half an hour, and then the hour and a half ride back home. And they'd be like, oh, you're here again? And I'd be like, yeah. And they're like, well, what else are you doing? And I'm like, oh, I got to go meet with my other colleagues who are working on the assembly side today. Like I would make it look like I was 50 people when it was really just me sometimes, or me and Claudia, or Toph, obviously, Toph came when he could come. Like, there was under a handful of people who would do it regularly, but yet our schedules didn't always overlap. So we had to make it look like, one person was 50, but making those connections was vital in New York.
I'm assuming the same in Texas. And I've seen it in Michigan and Minnesota and any state that I've been involved in. It's so critical to have, well, the ear of a legislator, but also the ability to talk to them.
It makes it easier too in subsequent sessions if you have them, because you've built relationships with these people over time. And not all the staffers are always the same. A lot of them are interns and they rotate out, but sometimes you'll see them in another office the next session. And they remember you. Like in Texas, I mean, look, the Texas legislature is all for this. They have been since 2015. We've already done that work, but they do remember you when you come back and they go, oh yeah, you're here for the Adoptee Rights Bill. Da, da, da. And there's been times where I've even had legislators, staff members say to me, oh, you're the one that you found your birth mom. Why did they remember stories because most of them do, they do care. They really do care. They do
They
find it very
absolutely-
interesting.
Yeah, they absolutely
Yeah.
do care, and they absolutely do remember stories. And like you said earlier, Shawna, so many of them have a connection to adoption. And
Mhm.
my experience in New York is that they'd be like, "What do you mean you can't get your birth certificate?" And I'd be like, "Yeah, no, that's exactly. Like,
Right.
I don't know how much more clear
I
I can.
don't know.
I cannot
Yeah.
legally get this paper." And they were like,
Right.
"Seriously?" And I'd be like, "Uh-huh." I'm like, I didn't know, right? When I first started this in 2014, I didn't know that this had gone on for decades, I didn't know that there were people who for decades, I didn't know about Florence Fisher, right? I didn't know that there were people who for decades had tried to change the law. Like that was like a completely eye-opening moment for me. But to hear people say like, so my cousin is adopted. You're telling me my cousin, I'm like, that's exactly what I'm telling you. Your cousin cannot get their original birth certificate.
Right.
Yeah. She even helps staffers get DNA kits because they were like, oh, my friend's adopted. I didn't even
Mhm.
know there was, and I was actually like doing genealogy in between office visits because I was still searching. Like
Mhm.
that was our bathroom joke. Is where's Shawna? She's in the bathroom doing her genealogy.
Oh,
I'm on
same. Yeah, I
Ancestry.
would like check to see if any new matches came in. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
But a couple staffers, I actually helped them get a kit and kind of I would go back and navigate that process with them. They would help a friend or a sibling or whatever. And so that kind of, and DNA was becoming a big thing at that time too. So it was very interesting to everyone too in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And I
Yeah,
used to
you
take,
both started before DNA went crazy.
yeah, I remember when
mhm.
when consumer DNA first came out, I had a friend of mine say to me, like, "Oh, Annette, you should do this." And I thought, A, I thought it was going to be ridiculously expensive, right? I didn't even look into it. And B, I was like, for what reason? I'm not related to anyone. Like, it didn't even occur to my brain when it first came out. You
Right,
should do this, right? But yeah, 2014 is when,
right.
at that point, it was considered the second largest hobby in America, and the first was gardening. And I know this because that was part of my spiel. And it even became part of, I would take my son, who was only 10 at the time. I would take him up with me, mostly because I probably wouldn't have made it back in time for the bus, but also because I
Mhm.
thought he would learn more there than he would in school, right? Like
Right.
this is a much better
Right.
experience as to how government and things like that work. But they would also ask him at 10 years old, like, what are you, like, why aren't you in school? And he would tell them, like, because I'm actually probably learning more here. My mom thinks I'm learning more here. Well, why is this important to you? And he'd be like, because in 8 years I can get my birth certificate and you're over 18, so you can get yours. But how come my mom can't get hers?
That's amazing.
So
Right.
that type of thing was really powerful with some of the staffers and even with some of the legislators.
Right. One of the
I met
things,
the first blood relative I ever met was Richard Slaughter, and I met him at the hearing in the House hearing in 2015 on the bill. I met him. He was sitting in front of me, and I had matched him on Ancestry, and he was the first blood relative besides my children that I had ever met in my life. And
Wow.
it was in the hearing that happened. So that's why Richard he was already involved, but that's why we would go together to offices and say, we're related. We just found out we're related. And we both have such a rich Texas history. He's like a 7th generation Texan. I'm a 6th generation Texan. And so that would really get people too. It's like, this is the first blood relative that I've ever known in my life besides my own children, my 4 children.
was it
Mhm.
coincidence that he was involved and then you matched?
Yeah, he on my birth record, I'll go quickly. On my adoption records, there was a mention of a Dr. Slaughter that had delivered my mother, my birth mother. And that was supposed to be a clue as to where she was born because Dr. Slaughter was a famous doctor in Sugar Land, Texas. And Richard is a Slaughter, as you know, and all the Slaughters are related in Texas, one way or the other. And when I did DNA, that name showed up on GEDmatch, and I went, oh, wait a minute, because I kept thinking I was related to Dr. Slaughter for some reason. And I contacted him, and like he said, oh yeah, I'm really involved in legislation here and I'm coming to the hearing. And I thought, well, I'm behind the bill. Our group is behind the bill. Let's meet up. He lived in San Antonio, I lived in Houston. And he said, well, I'll be at the hearing. And it's not that I forgot about it, but I wasn't focused because I was testifying that day. And he just happened to be sitting in front of me. And we met in the hearing. And then we used that for the rest of the session, you know, talked to the Senate and said,
Right.
look, these are real people here. This happens.
So I think me and you are actually six cousins or something like that too.
We are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think what people get so nervous about with lobbying is that they feel like when they're going in to meet with, and it's usually a staffer, but sometimes it's the senator or rep, is that this is a make or break conversation. That it's gonna you can, if you flub it, the bill goes down in flames, and that's not true. So I wonder if you could talk about, what really you're trying to do when you're going in there to talk about the bill. Not to, I mean, you're obviously selling the bill. You're probably also trying to get a commitment to the bill, but those seem to be few and far between because they don't really commit until it's time for them to do so.
No, in New York, they committed. In New York, New York had well, they still have what they call the golden ticket. So if you were going to sponsor the bill, you had to send paperwork down, and it was a yellow ticket, like you got a golden ticket saying that you were a sponsor of this bill. And that's specifically what we tried to do in New York. We tried to get people not just to say, yeah, I'll vote for it if it comes to the floor or if it comes to my committee, but to co-sponsor the legislation so that we knew that they had a commitment to it.
Right. That was your ask. Your ask was co-sponsor the bill.
Was to co-sponsor, right? And if people were like, yeah, más o menos about it, we'd be like, okay, but can we come back to have further conversations with you, right? And we would not go to the people that we knew were adamantly against us. For years, we didn't go to the people that we knew, just who our largest opposition was, because what was the point? We were putting the time into going there, the expense into going there, because everything was out of our own pockets: the gas, the tolls, the parking, having a meal while you were there, grabbing a bottle of water, like all of that was out of our own pockets, the expense of literature, whatever. So why am I going to go waste my time, which equates to money, to talk to people that we knew were never going to come around, right?
Right.
But yeah, in New York it was, but it wasn't so much like, even from the beginning, it wasn't like I felt like, oh, this is either gonna, like, it's do or die, right? It was more, I really wanted to get them on board, because the more people we got on board, the faster it would get done and the faster I could go back to my life as it was before.
Right. And you ended
Right.
up with a super majority of sponsors.
Yeah, 5 years later.
Right. Yeah.
And then,
I mean, that's something that,
and I discovered that the life that I had before, I can never go back to. Like, this was a before this and after this moment, right? And I've told you guys before that my son, when he was younger, at one point said to me, like, when is this going to stop? I miss my mom, Annette. I don't know who this Kim person that you became is. And I'd be like, I don't really know who she is either, but I found out that that was my birth name, and everything started snowballing from there. And I told him at that point, I'm like, you'll come to a point in life where you'll realize that something happens and there's a before this and an after this, and you can't go back to the before.
wait, so is your before and after when the bill passed, or when it was signed, or when it went into
Like, I've got a couple. I've got like the finding out that people had tried to do this for years, for decades, right? There was a before that and after that. I've got when I found my name in the birth index, and I've got, yeah, like when the bill passed, because at that point I couldn't, as much as I wanted to, I really wanted nothing more than to be like, New York is done, peace out. Like, Greg, Shawna, we'll be friends. I'm still going to chat with you, but like, I'm out. I'm going back to, doing what I used to do. But at that point, I realized that I couldn't do it, because I wanted every state to do this. I wanted every adopted person to have this right.
Right.
But like, they're, like chapters in a book, right? There were several before this and after this moments.
That's a really good segue into the next thought, and this is going to go to Shawna, but I'll say a little bit about me first. This work, this being involved in, whether it's a bunch of states or even one state, is so exhausting and so hard. There's ultimately burnout almost every year, and that you need an entire summer to recover from it. But also the impact on your family is immense. So that if I were to say to Nancy, my wife, I think I'll stick with it until, one more session, one more, 2025. She is a very hard no on that. She will say, no, you can't do this anymore, because she sees the impact it has on your life, emotionally, physically, everything. And, you know, the time that it takes and dealing with all these issues that pop up so fast, and you have to resolve them so fast. And then you sit around and wait for another few or 4 days, and then something else pops up. So Shawna, that as background, and I think Annette and I still tease you that you're not really going to retire from doing legislative work in Texas, but I think that you're pretty clear about that, no?
I'm very clear about that. And I said it in 2021 because I was so frustrated with Senator Campbell's opposition. She's the lone opponent for anybody that's listening that doesn't know that. The Texas legislature would have passed a clean bill in 2015 had it not been for Senator Campbell. But yeah, I think it's demoralizing. It's already demoralizing just doing the work. I mean, that's how I feel about it. And it really can be. But in Texas in particular, like with the political landscape here and what it is now, especially post Dobbs, I just don't see it moving. I don't see her moving out of the way. And if another group that's involved decides to compromise on legislation in a discriminatory way, I feel like we've done our jobs as a coalition. And I felt responsible for that for a long time, that if I turn my back, it's going to go south. If we turn our backs, it's going to go south. But just maintaining the status quo that's a hard job. It's a hard job. And that's basically what we've been doing for the last 2 sessions. And I'm not willing to waste resources on that anymore. I'm not willing to take time away from my family. I mean, I still had Aaron and Steven at home when I started this. And I almost missed my son's college baseball scholarship signing because of this. I mean, there's been things that my marriage at one point suffered because of this time away. So I've given a lot of my life to this, as have all of us here. And I'm just not willing to give that anymore. And so that's why this past session, I in the House, when I gave my testimony, I just gave it all. I told it all. Because I wanted to walk out of there knowing like I gave them everything and I cannot give them anymore.
Right. They've taken it. Yeah.
Yeah.
They've taken enough. They've taken enough from us. And Shawna, you and I have talked about the marriage thing, right? That's another before and after moment for me. Like my marriage definitively suffered because of all of this. It definitively did. I put everything aside, right? You almost missed your son's baseball signing. I literally left my son, who had learning disabilities, to take his first New York State's Regents exam without having like his mom there to say in the morning, like, you go, good, you got this. Like I left him the night before it to rush up to Albany because the bill was to be brought to the floor. So like I left him to basically fend for it. Like I was like, good luck, love you, let me know, call me. Like
I remember that. Yeah, I remember that.
So much aside. I was horrified. Like that was a horrifying choice for me to have to make, right? I mean, I spent so long advocating for my son's rights, right? As far as like IEPs and things like that went. So I had to do I do this for my son, or do I see this through to the end, what I've been working on for the past 5 years? And he ultimately is the one, like I left it to him at first and he was like, Ma, just go, because basically he was like, Ma, just go, because I don't want to have to hear you if you don't go, right? Because he knew how upset I would be. But Shawna and I have had many private conversations about marriages. Like I don't know that my marriage will ever be what it was before 2014.
So we're really selling lobbying, aren't we?
Yeah, everyone should just get involved. But the thing is, Greg, here's the thing. No, but you know what? And this is why people should get involved, because if more people were involved, right? If the burden of the weight of it all in Texas didn't fall squarely on Shawna's shoulders, if the burden of the weight of it all in New York didn't fall mostly on my shoulders, if there were other people to help us along, then maybe things would have been different for us.
Yeah, I think it's that burden that you feel, and it feels very real, that if you screw up, it's all your fault. Or
but it's not even like if you screw up, it's like, who else was going?
Well, but it's also
like Tim from the AAC was going, right? But like, who else was going?
And what's going to happen if you turn your back? What's
That's
going to
it.
happen if you turn
That's
the
the
minute you
one.
turn your back?
You
Right, and
can't.
who can you trust to us, right? Because we know, right? We know that the deformers are there. We know that they're, like I said, there was an opposing bill the one session. Like there were people who were trying to get different bills passed in New York. So like, what if someone convinced, my senator to change his mind and to go with that bill over this bill?
Right. Which kind of gets to a point, well, if it's so hard, which it is, what's the value of just hiring a lobbyist to do that day-to-day work?
I think it's valuable if you can't have people there on a regular basis during a session. But I also think sometimes it can hurt a cause, because a lobbyist, unless they have a personal connection to this, or they're an adoptee themselves or what have you, they can go in there and do their lobbying magic, and they may be able to move it past what I always say the fix is in. They
Mhm.
may be able to get you past a hurdle, depending on what that hurdle is. But I don't think they can reach people the way that we can. So even, let's just say in Texas, for instance, had we hired a lobbyist, it wouldn't have mattered unless we had gone through all those years that we did and connected with these people on a personal level. I
Right.
mean, to me, it's not the same thing. It's really not. I mean, this is a very emotionally charged issue. So I'm not pro lobbyist.
Yeah, the issue for me is one, there's just like you have to educate legislators, you have to really educate the lobbyists unless they are somehow
Yes.
deeply connected to the issue.
Mhm.
And also you
Yes.
do lose some control over your message in some ways, because they're the
Mhm.
spokespersons. They're not the people that are living it. And it makes it really tough for them to understand it. And they may even say, well, that sounds pretty reasonable for you guys to compromise on that. Why don't you do that? And it's really something that's just
Exactly.
always off. It's all
Well,
off limits. Yeah.
yeah, and we see it even with legislators and bill sponsors, right? We think that they've got it, right? We think, yeah, okay, yep, you've completely got it. And then all of a sudden they're like, and because everyone has a right to their medical information, I'm bringing this bill forward. And I'm like, whoa, back the train up. This has nothing to do with medical information. It's the OBC. It's not an AED, right? It's not going to save anybody's life. So because we see it,
Right.
even with the legislators, like you said, Greg, what if a lobbyist were to say, oh yeah, yeah, they need their medical information, blah, blah, blah. Like this doesn't achieve that goal.
Right.
So
Right.
then you're getting all of these mixed messages out there.
Right. Yeah, and I've seen, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Louisiana had a lobbyist, Georgia currently has a lobbyist, AAC had a lobbyist, which for a part of the time. And what I
Mm-hmm.
saw was useful. And I'm not involved directly in Louisiana or Georgia, but they have inside information so that they give you information about what's happening and what may be the next step.
Right.
And that's
Mhm.
useful information unless you already have a really close relationship with the sponsor and they trust you and you
Mhm.
trust them, and they can give
Mhm.
you that information like you had with Joe does it L,
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
you guys could, I remember, and maybe it was 2017, 2019, we'd say, oh, what's going on? And you just said, let me call Joe and
Let me
see
call
what he's,
Joe. I always
yeah,
remember Shawna saying that.
He would text me from the floor, and that's how we knew what was going on, like in real time. In the Senate, for instance, when Patrick wouldn't bring it up at the last minute, when Senator Crichton had our bill, they were texting us from the floor saying, this is what's not going to happen. This is what's happening. And I would have never had that information had I not had been, known them personally. So
right,
I don't know. And there is a lobbyist friend that is in the orbit of the groups in Texas that is not a paid lobbyist, but she's a long time, well-known, very well-respected lobbyist, and a friend of mine. And she does do some work on this as far as getting, going into maybe meetings or offices or getting meetings for those of us that are working on this that maybe we wouldn't have gotten before. But she understands the issue. She has a personal connection to it, and she's let us talk to her and visit with her personally and outside of the Capitol. So, but as far as like a paid lobbyist just coming in from a lobbying firm, I don't think that would have that wouldn't have worked in Texas.
yeah. And
I
I
just
think
don't think it would
some
have.
states are like that too. It's like I'm in Minnesota, they're
Yeah.
probably, I'm sure there are lobbyists around, but it was just not something that when we sat down with legislators they were expecting. And I think they also think that, hey, these are real people that this is an issue that's important to them, and they're showing up, and that's a big deal. They're not hired lobbyists told what to say and what to seek. But yeah, there are some states where it's just not lobbyist friendly. In some states there may be. The other thing too, obviously, is it costs a fortune. I mean, in Louisiana and Georgia, I'm sure they're anywhere from $20,000 to $40,000 into the cost of lobbyists. And we just, I mean, we can barely pay our expenses to get back and forth to the Capitol, 10 times a session. And so that's the other barrier there. And it's just, to me, it always seems like you're going to spend all your time and energy trying to raise money to hire lobbyists when you could probably, if you could, get enough volunteers to help with that lobbying. And that's been critical. I think when you go into this, it sounds like, Annette, you would go sometimes by yourself, but often you'd go with Claude, and Shawna, you would go with Erica. And I found it really enjoyable to go with two other people or one other person into a meeting with a legislator or a staffer, because you're kind of riffing off each other in some ways and you're supporting each other. And that's what happened in Michigan as well.
I'm sorry, I have to say too, Kim Dimmick lobbied with me
That's right.
for years. So I can't leave Kim Dimmick out, because she's a Gladney adoptee, a very good friend of mine. Is not involved in this work anymore directly, but she spent many a day driving back and forth together for many years with me. So I can't talk about this without including her.
So hi, Kim, if you're listening.
Yeah, I think for me, the going by myself so much, and again, because there were two competing bills toward the end, right? So especially at that point in time, I think that's where I felt that the weight of it was on my shoulders so much.
Right.
Right. That I had to keep going. We were so close, and I had to see if Senator this or Assembly member that, if I could just get one or two more people on board, that would bring us closer to the supermajority that we ultimately ended up achieving. Right. But that's part of the reason why, like, I would go up. Like I said, if I had 4 or more hours, I would go. If I only had like an area of time where I had 3 hours, I would know that I wouldn't be able to even go to one office and do the job, right? Just do the job as far as just even communicating with people.
So this issue of hard yes or soft yes, and that's what I talk to people a lot about. In New York, you obviously had a hard yes if they sponsored it. But I remember talking with the Speaker of the House in Minnesota, and we were meeting with her for some reason about the bill. And she then asked, well, how many supporters do you have? And one of the people in the coalition, it's kind of a coalition, said, we have this many. And then she said, well, how many of those are hard yeses? And because that was the critical question. And I'm wondering if a state like Texas, where you don't have this sort of pile on of sponsors to show that you are hard yes, how do you make that distinction of hard yes versus soft yes, where you can't really depend on a soft yes at all?
Well, in the early days, 2015, my early days, we did have a lot of co-sponsors in the House, because it was before Campbell. At the end of that session is when Campbell threw down the gauntlet. So we did have a lot of sponsors, and those were mostly hard yeses. Those were people that were really about this. A lot of them understood it on a genealogical level too. Because Texas is very big on Texas history. So there was a lot of co-sponsors that I actually would consider to be champions at the time of this too, that spoke on the House floor and in support of this. As the years moved on and the sessions moved on, there were people that they'd sign on, but could we count on them to vote yes if it came to the floor? I don't know. There were people that were fully supportive and wouldn't even sign on because of Campbell.
Right.
Because they didn't want her to see their name on there, which is why all of our co-sponsorship has kind of decreased over the sessions, because people don't want her to see their name on that.
Yeah, you're just caught up in the politics that are going on, and it's really not even in your control, which is really frustrating.
Right. It is.
But it's also I find it okay for people to realize that, because then I think you're not so hard on yourself. These are things that are outside of your control. There's even an element of luck in getting things done in the legislature, and to understand that, I think, makes the work a little bit easier on yourself psychologically.
For sure.
And I mean, I think I've said it too many times, but I always think there is always an element of luck in getting a bill, an unrestricted equal rights bill, passed and enacted. Legislator gets defeated in an election that was always an opponent. That would be, an example of luck in Texas. And suddenly Senator Campbell is appointed to something else, or decides not to run again. And then suddenly the whole situation may open up.
Right. So if the stars move a little bit and realign a little bit, who knows? I think we could move it. Like I said, there's not, and I mean this fully, there has not been one office that I've ever gone into or experienced any conversation with a legislator or staffer besides Campbell's office that has said, absolutely no, this is the worst thing we've ever heard of. We're completely against this. And that's including the executive chamber. this is a Campbell issue. And that's why, you know, again, back to the retirement, we've done the work. We've done the work. We've done it. We've done our job. I tell you guys, that's what I say to you guys all the time. And I'm walking away with clean hands. I've done the work.
Right? You've done your job. You've done your
Right.
bond, right? Like Gary used to tell people, my husband used to tell people, they would say like, oh, what does your wife do? Because at that point during the lobbying, I was not working. And he'd be like, oh,
Right.
my wife's a full-time volunteer. Like her full-time volunteer job is what he would say.
Right. But what do we,
Right.
so all this time we've been talking about original birth certificates, which, you know, that's the context we're in. And, you know, all these things really apply to anything that you're doing at the legislature, depending upon what the issue is. And I'm wondering if we step away as we essentially get older, do you have any thoughts on what the future of this issue looks like and who's leading that charge? Or is it an issue that's really resonating with younger adoptees at all?
I think that's part of the reason why none of the three of us have actually stepped away when we've said we're going to step away, right? Because who are we going to pass the proverbial torch to?
Or who's
Right.
interested in
Or who's
holding the
interested in
torch?
it? Yeah. That's what I'm saying. And who, you know, now since New York passed and then the other states, right? Like we're kind of on a roll now, right?
Right.
So I think more people are starting to be concerned about it and to want to get involved in it as far as adopted people, but they're still middle-aged people. I haven't seen younger people
Or
like,
people of color or transracial
or
adoptees.
I was just gonna say that, right? Or yeah, I haven't seen that.
It's a very white issue, and I'm wondering
And it's a
how
very white
long.
woman issue.
Correct. Yeah,
Mhm.
I'm the
Yeah.
kind of strange man in that sometimes. But yeah, I worry about the issue overtaking the OBC overtaking the narrative of what adoptee rights is when it is so much more. So many other issues that are out there. I mean, we're seeing different kinds of bills popping up now, like correcting your birth record or kinship relationships that aren't adoption, things like that.
But I think that's a snowball effect. I don't know if we would be seeing those things if so many people hadn't begun and continued with and stuck with the work of the OBC stuff. I think it's almost a snowball effect there, right? Correcting the birth certificate.
Well,
Right?
those are all related to the OBC, but I'm wondering what issues we're missing when we're concentrating so much on that.
I think we're missing a lot. I think we're missing trauma informed, like, you know, making sure that adoptive, like if adoption is going to continue to exist as it, right, then we need to make sure that adoptive parents are trauma informed. We need to make sure that mental health professionals are adoption competent, that they understand the intricacies of adoption, right? And that's one of the reasons, like I get raked across the coals a lot, as does Claudia, for working for AFF-CNY. But I can justify it because they do that. They work to educate parents, because if the system is going to exist, we have to try to help the kids who are currently adopted or are currently in foster care.
Right. That's the same conversation I've had with Astrid Castro
Mm-hmm.
about why she does the work that she does. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
She always likens it to where are the little ostriches today?
Mm-hmm.
When I needed one to help when I was that age.
The more the ostriches of the world, the more their voices and our voices are elevated, right? Kids have the benefit of technology now. Right. I had to go to the library and go through the card catalog to find things, right? They can look on their phone, you know, how do adopted people feel? And all of these things are now going to come up. So like we've not only done our jobs, Shawna, in as far as educating legislators, right? We've done our jobs in that we left these breadcrumbs for the younger generation to find and to have the, oh shit, it's not just me moment long before I did when I was, you know, in my 40s or 30s.
Right.
Well, I think too that we have, because of baby boxes, like our issue is really about upending secrecy. I mean, if you ask me, that's really what the OBC issue is really about, is upending secrecy in adoption. And I think with this regression of civil rights in this country, I'd never imagined it was going to be this bad,
Right.
especially in Texas. And then we've got the baby box situation, which Marley saw this years ahead of anybody that this was coming. And this was going to be a problem. I think that might be the new issue that carries that forward too. So it's not just OBCs, it's babies being left in a box that have no paper trail to document who they are originally. That might be that new topic that moves forward.
For me, and I think I've talked to both of you about this as well, it's also understanding and being engaged in abolition work when it comes to the family policing system, and being allies in that and doing what we can. Because I think, and I've said this before, if you were to fix in the sense of abolition, the family policing system, you're going to greatly reduce the need for parents to relinquish their children, whether it's voluntarily or involuntarily. And Absolutely. So I think that's possibly the future of where things go with adoptee rights, even though we're really talking about children at that point as opposed to adults. Because we've been talking now about adult adoptees. We're already adults, and we kind of draw the line there. But then it's not that you get sucked in the adoption of children. You realize that where were other people back when we were not even born, and how were they regulating or not regulating adoption that led to where we are today.
And the challenge moving forward with abolition work too is to get people to understand that to say you're anti-adoption or pro-abolition, it doesn't mean you're anti-giving children a family, children having safe families to grow up in. It means that you're anti-racist, anti-classist, you're anti-sexist, you're anti-family policing. So that's going to be the challenge, is to create a strong message where people don't hear abolition and anti-adoption and go, oh, they don't want children to have homes. 10 years from now, this could be a completely different conversation, And
we have no clue either because of the elections that are coming up.
No, we have no idea.
Yeah, that's what's so scary. So we joke among ourselves all the time about creating a movie about our life, not about our individual lives, but in some ways, yeah, that's true. But because there's no good absurdist kind of crazy movies about adoptees who are doing like weird stuff. And so if we were to end this, what's the ending scene in that movie? I think we talked about this a little bit.
I was just going to say, we just talked about this just the other day, right?
Right. Because we talk about this, we always say to each other, this goes in the movie. And then, we're also really exhausted. And we came up with the idea that we just pull up to a Capitol in this crappy, rusted out, belching exhaust RV and pile out. And I don't know. I just don't know what happens after that.
And the fog of the exhaust. And we just kind of like go off.
Because it kind of just feels that way.
And a hubcap falls off.
Right. But somehow we have power in that situation. I'm not sure what it looks like, but we do.
I don't know, but whatever it is, it better have a cool theme song.
It always has to have a theme song. I don't think it's going to be We Aren't Going to Take It or Crossroads.
It's interesting, right? I just got a text from someone who wants to know if we know anybody in adoption land who's all about rehoming, because this person just chatted with a CNN producer.
Yeah, and so all these issues pop up all the time, and there doesn't seem to be one clearinghouse for all of these issues, and that's, I think, what Adoptees United is trying to do, but it's just so large that we are going to have to be allies on certain issues and leaders on others. I mean, true allies, meaning if someone is taking on rehoming as an issue, then we are true allies in that and not trying to enter that space and take it over. Yeah, and I think that's what often happens. Like, if for some reason adoptees think that they can do it all, are reluctant really to genuinely collaborate, and which is why we've built coalitions and try to force that. And so it's strange that is within this community.
And I want to just say too, when we said that it's that it's been predominantly white women, right? It's also been predominantly white domestic infant adopted people, right? It's not involving the 13-year-old who was in foster care from the time they were 8 and was adopted when they were 14.
Right.
It's not involving step parent adoptions. And these were things that I would say to legislators too. Like in a step parent adoption, even though that kid may know who their mother or father was, or may still visit with the biological mother or father, whatever, that birth certificate is still getting changed. They still can't get the original birth certificate.
Right.
The umbrella is big, and we need to make sure that everyone knows that there's room under the umbrella that they can stay dry.
And individual and collective power together. Yeah.
Right.
So those who are joining as individuals do have power within that relationship, no matter who they are. All right. Well, thanks so much for talking.
We didn't curse very much. We didn't
No,
curse that much.
Oh, I mean, here's your chance if you want.
Who can I tell to all the way off? The list is long.
What Next is a production of Adoptees United, Inc., a national nonprofit charitable organization. It is produced and hosted by me, Gregory Luce. Check out our past episodes and subscribe to any future episodes wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget, any donations to Adoptees United are tax deductible. So consider supporting our work by donating to us at adopteesunited.org/podcast. See you next time.